Rio de Janeiro is recognized as one of the most spectacular cities in the world, but it also has the most spectacular examples of urban squalor. Disfiguring the beauty of the scenery are the favelas or shanty towns. More than 1 million people live in the makeshift slums which cling to Rio's hills. The only saving grace of the favelas is the strong community feeling. It's a spirit born out of despair and shared suffering. The alternative would be to move to distant ghettos of shoddily built estates miles outside the city. So most choose to stay amid the filth and disease. And every year the plight of the favelas is highlighted. The precarious existence of the residents is put under an even greater threat than the dangers and horrors that pass for normal life in the slums. But this time, the shanties were not the only parts of Rio at risk. When the rains came, the whole city was engulfed. For most of February, the storms were unrelenting, and half the annual rainfall poured down in 3 weeks. The prosperous business districts were inundated along with the slums, and the city was paralyzed. Everyone became involved in the task of fighting the flood. But many homes were beyond repair, and Rio's problem of homelessness was no longer confined to the poor. The catastrophe meant even the affluent needed a helping hand. City officials declared a state of calamity as the swollen rivers spilled over their banks and spread across the countryside. The problem on the plains was acute, but on Rio's hills it became a nightmare. The mudslides swept through the favelas, crushing all in their path. The avalanches of debris tore into the residential areas below, and all over the city, rescue workers frantically searched for survivors. And along with the tragedies, there were triumphs. After hours of entombment, some were brought back from the dead. But for many, there was no reprieve, and almost 300 perished in the disaster. Some had to wait days before they could be reached in the outlying districts. And underlining the drama, the agony of the bereaved. More than 18,000 were left homeless in a city already gripped by an appalling housing crisis. Having lost the little they had in the stricken favelas, they gathered together in the emergency centers, destitute and desperate. For those used to living on a knife edge of poverty, the floods swept away their last vestiges of security. Many of the displaced shanty dwellers have set up new camps on safer ground. Although the sites are less dangerous, the conditions are, if anything, worse than the hillside favelas. And now there are new threats facing Rio's poor. Unlike the obvious dangers left in the wake of the storms, these are insidious but just as deadly. Epidemic haunts the favelas. The traditionally grim, insanitary surroundings are now lethal instead of just a health hazard. Contaminated water carries a life-threatening disease which can be contracted through the skin. People are advised not to go barefoot, but such warnings are meaningless to those who can't afford shoes. The condition is caused by a bacteria carried in rat's urine, and the floods spread the disease into the water supplies of the shanties. Anyone drinking, washing, or even walking in puddles is at risk. The Brazilian government has sent health inspectors into the favelas to try to halt the epidemic, but the extermination of the massive rat population in the slums is a Herculean task. More than 600 cases of leptospirosis have already been reported. There's no vaccine, and treatment amounts to barrier nursing until the disease has run its course. If the patient is strong and otherwise healthy, there's a good chance of recovery. But the weak succumb, and so far 30 have died. Rio is struggling to meet the immediate needs of its people. But inoculations and rubble clearing don't touch the city's central problem. Unless the favelas and all their attendant misery are consigned to history, Rio's future, like its past and present, will be scarred by tragedy and grief.